Dr. Navarro, when the quake hit, what was the first moment you realized you were trapped?
And the quake sealed my exit almost instantly. That's when I knew I wasn't getting out the same way I came in.
The heat was stripping thoughts out of my head. Every breath felt heavier than the last. I should have died in there. But something in me just wouldn't stop.
They found her notebook fused to a crystal wall, but not her body. Because for 30 hours, in a cave hotter than a desert, beneath thousands of glowing mineral blades, she refused to die. Those are the first words the investigation team released when they finally recovered the equipment she left behind, her pack, her tools, the cracked remnants of what used to be her radio. But when reporters asked where she was, why the notebook looked half-melted, why the rescue took so long, the team simply stared at the footage, silent. Because no one expected her to walk out of that cave alive. No human should have survived what happened inside the Naica Crystal Caverns, a place so deadly, scientists compare it to stepping inside a boiling lung. But she did. Her name was Dr. Elena Navarro, a 34-year-old geological researcher known for her calm voice, steady hands, and an almost unsettling fascination with minerals formed under extreme conditions. Where most people saw opaque crystals and glittering walls, Elena saw history, the Earth's secrets written in calcium sulfate, time frozen in blades of gypsum longer than trucks. On the morning the expedition began, she stood at the entrance to the cavern in a cooling suit, helmet light flickering against the thick, shimmering haze rising from below. 2 degrees, and that was meters away from the main chamber. The Naica Crystal Caves didn't like visitors. They tolerated them. Briefly. A technician handed her the last piece of gear, a respirator designed to keep her from inhaling the dense mineral-rich humidity that could collapse a human lung within minutes. He asked. Elena nodded. Her voice was steady. Too steady. "I need clean seismic readings," she said. "One person in the chamber. No vibrations, no cross noise." It should not have taken long. She checked her harness, tightened the straps, lifted her pack over one shoulder, and stepped onto the metal ladder descending into the brightest, hottest, most surreal cavern known to science. Inside, it felt like entering a cathedral carved out of glass. The crystals towered above her in monstrous arcs, some as thick as tree trunks, others thin and translucent like frozen beams of moonlight. The entire chamber glowed with refracted light bouncing in every direction, creating shifting halos of pale blue and white. The crystals weren't just formations, they were architecture. She paused on the last rung of the ladder, letting her eyes adjust. Sweat formed instantly beneath her collar, trickling down her back like hot syrup. Her respirator hissed quietly, cooling only enough to keep her conscious, only enough to keep her breathing. Her voice recorder clicked on automatically. Navarro. "Entering main chamber," she said, her tone professional, unshaken by the heat. "Humidity 97%, visibility moderate to high. Crystals stable." She stepped off the ladder. Her boots landed on a crystal slab so smooth it looked wet but wasn't. Gypsum reflected her shadow into a dozen distorted silhouettes. She walked between pillars of mineral so old they predated human civilization by millions of years. "God," she whispered, not for the recorder, for herself. She set her equipment down, assembling components with practiced efficiency, seismograph, vibration dampeners, a probe for reading heat flux. The chamber responded to her movements with faint echoes like soft wind, though there was no wind here, only heat and silence. Then the ground trembled. Just once, soft, barely noticeable. Elena looked up. Gypsum blades hummed faintly, a resonance she had never heard inside the chamber before. She reached for the recorder. "Minor seismic activity detected," she said quietly. "Probably surface level. Everything seems stable, but..." The tremor hit, hard. The entire cave shook, crystals grinding against each other with a sound like glass screaming. Elena staggered backward, grabbing a support beam for balance. Dust cascaded from above, sparkling in the glowing chamber like falling stars. Her radio crackled. "Navarro, do you copy? We're detecting..." A deafening crack drowned the voice. The ceiling shifted. Crystals snapped. A massive slab sheared away from the upper wall and fell, smashing onto the entry platform where she'd been minutes earlier. The ladder twisted. The walkway collapsed. The only exit sealed beneath thousands of pounds of crystal debris. Her radio went dead. Elena froze, staring at the place where her escape route had existed moments before. No ladder, no walkway, no path. Only a jagged wall of interlocking crystal slabs, sharp, hot, immovable. She exhaled, a long, shaking breath that fogged her visor. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Okay, you're all right. It's fine. There's another exit." But she knew the truth. There wasn't. The chamber had only one controlled access point, the one now buried beneath tons of gypsum blades. She tried the radio again. "Base, this is Navarro. The entrance is sealed. I repeat, I am sealed inside the chamber." Static. More static. Her suit's cooling unit beeped, a warning. Temperature rising. Humidity rising. Survival time dropping. She moved toward another cluster of crystals, checking the walls, measuring cracks, searching for any path she could widen. But everywhere she turned, she trapped herself deeper into a glittering maze of mineral spires. "Think," she whispered. But thinking was hard when the air felt like breathing inside a sauna full of boiling water. Her suit's cooling gel struggled, her throat burned, her pulse raced. Then she saw something. Condensation. Tiny beads of water forming along the edges of a massive translucent blade. Droplets sliding, collecting, merging into a shimmering film. Water. Not clean water, not safe water, but it was something. She dragged herself closer, pressed her fingers against the crystal, the heat radiating through her glove. She tapped the surface, hollow. Moisture was trapped inside. She muttered. Her hands trembled as she reached for her hammer. One strike. The crystal vibrated. A small crack appeared. Another strike. A shard fell away, and a single fat droplet of water slid into the air. She caught it on her glove and let it drip into her mouth through the edge of her mask. Warm, metallic, mineral-heavy, but water. The first she'd had in hours. She exhaled shakily. "This is how I stay alive," she whispered. And somewhere deep inside the chamber, another crystal groaned, as if the cave itself had heard her, and disagreed. The droplet tasted like warm metal. As it slid across her tongue, Elena felt it coat the back of her throat, leaving behind a bitter, chalky note. Gypsum-rich water was never meant to be swallowed. It was condensation trapped inside crystals large enough to dwarf a human being. Ancient moisture, mineral-heavy, potentially unsafe. But the moment it hit her stomach, her body reacted with such desperate relief that she swayed forward, resting her forehead against the cool edge of the crystal. She wasn't dying yet. Not today. Her breathing steadied, though the air still felt thick enough to chew. Her suit's cooling system whirred weakly, struggling against the cavern's oppressive heat. 8 degrees C, humidity 99%. Her visor flickered as droplets formed on the inside, making her vision swim in soft blurs of refracted light. She wiped it with a trembling gloved hand. Okay, she whispered. Water buys me time. The cavern groaned again, long, low, like something ancient shifting in its sleep. Elena turned toward the sound. Crystals don't groan, not unless the earth beneath them is still moving. A thin shower of gypsum dust rained from above, sparkling like silver snowfall in the glowing chamber. Her radio hissed weakly. Not a voice, just static, popping like embers. She tried anyway. "Base, this is Navarro," she said, forcing calm into her tone. "I'm alive. The entry path is sealed by multiple crystal slabs, structural instability increasing." Static. The silence in response felt heavier than the heat. She adjusted her mask, blinking sweat from her eyes. If the team heard anything at all, it would be muffled fragments. The earthquake that trapped her likely damaged the transmitter.
She could shout into the cave for hours, and no one would hear more than echoes. Her recorder clicked on again. Time index. Her voice shook slightly. "I've located condensation sources on multiple crystals. Breaking them may provide intermittent hydration." She stopped, noticing her hand trembling around the recorder. "Focus, Elena." She clipped it back to her belt. The main chamber stretched before her like a crystalline maze, massive intersecting blades rising at impossible angles, some leaning against each other like fallen pillars, others jutting out from the floor like jagged sails. To her right, a narrow crevice glowed faintly with reflected light. To her left, a long corridor formed where two enormous crystals met, a shimmering tunnel of translucent walls. She headed left. Every step required balance. The crystal floors weren't flat. They were slanted, rounded, fractured, polished smooth over eons. Sweat trickled down her neck. Her boots slipped twice, but she caught herself on jutting mineral edges. As she walked, she noticed something strange. The light. It didn't behave normally here. It wavered, shifted, moved. Not like shadows, but like refracted sunlight dancing inside water. Only there was no water here. Only heat. Only crystals. "Optical illusions," she muttered. "Refracted light." But the deeper she went, the stranger the patterns became. Blobs of pale blue danced across the walls. Ribbons of shimmering white slid across her visor. At one point, she thought she saw something inside a crystal. A shape, a figure, a blur leaning forward. She blinked hard. It was only her reflection, distorted into something ghost-like by the crystal's internal fractures. Her breath returned to a ragged rhythm as she pushed forward. The corridor narrowed, forcing her to turn sideways and squeeze between two enormous slabs. Her pack scraped against the mineral surface, making high-pitched chirps that echoed like distant cries. Then she froze. Up ahead, a landmark she recognized. A seismic probe jammed into a crystal base. Her probe. She had walked in a loop. No, not a loop. The quake had shifted the cavern. Crystals had moved. Entire sections had rotated, bending pathways into new shapes. Which meant there was no map anymore, no orientation, no predictable escape route. The cave had rearranged itself like a puzzle she didn't know the edges of. Her chest tightened. Her cooling suit beeped again. Warning, core temperature rising. Hydration required. Her throat burned. Every swallow felt like sandpaper rubbing against raw skin. She looked at the probe. Behind it, a towering crystal leaned at a precarious angle, pushed out of alignment by seismic pressure. Its surface glistened with moisture. She approached slowly. Condensation was forming again, dripping down in faint trails that flickered with prism colors. She raised her hammer. One controlled strike. The blade vibrated, then a small fragment fell away, exposing a clear pocket of water. She cupped her glove, letting droplets collect before tilting them into her mouth. Warm, metallic, life. Her breathing steadied again. Her recorder clicked as she spoke through a dry, cracking voice. Note: hydration from crystal cavities is possible. Breaking them increases water access, but also destabilizes structures. Must
She swallowed hard, wincing as the liquid hit her throat. Then the cavern answered her. A deep, booming crack rolled through the maze, louder than before. Dust exploded from a distant wall. A crystal as thick as a tree trunk shifted, grinding against another with a teeth-aching screech. The shockwave made Elena stumble backward, hitting her shoulder against a jagged edge that tore through the outer layer of her suit. She gasped. The heat hit her instantly, like sticking her arm into an oven. Her suit's internal monitor pulsed red. Suit breach detected. Cooling compromised. "No, no, no," she whispered, fumbling with her pack for a repair patch. Her fingers shook violently as she pressed the seal over the tear. It adhered, but her cooling gel pack beeped its warning again. Her time was shrinking. She couldn't afford mistakes. She couldn't afford to stay in this chamber. She couldn't afford to panic. But then she heard it. A faint sound far beyond the shifting crystals. A rumble of rushing water? No, not water. Air. Air movement. A ventilation fissure. A pressure shaft. A crack she could reach. Her eyes widened. Air meant two things. A path the quake had opened. A possible way out, or to higher ground. She moved toward the sound, stepping carefully across a series of slanted crystal plates. Her footing slipped again, and she caught herself on a jutting shard. The air grew slightly cooler. Slightly. Enough to give her hope. The corridor opened into a smaller chamber, almost spherical, lit by dozens of intersecting crystals that formed a dazzling dome overhead. And there, near the far edge, a dark opening in the crystal wall. Not man-made, not part of the original cave. A quake fissure. Elena stared at it, heart pounding, suit overheating, breath shaking. She stepped toward the fissure, unaware that behind her, the crystal she had broken was beginning to crack further, and the cave was not done shifting, not even close. The fissure breathed. That was the only way Elena could describe it. A subtle pulse of cooler air drifted out of the narrow slit in the crystal wall, brushing across her faceplate like a whisper, faint, uneven, but unmistakably alive. She stepped closer. The opening was jagged, only wide enough for her to slip through sideways. Crystals along the edges were still warm from friction, their surfaces dusted with fresh shards from the recent cave shift. Elena hesitated. Up to this point, everything she had encountered inside the Naica chamber had been documented, mapped by teams, measured, photographed. Beautiful, deadly, but known. This fissure was not known. This was new, earthquake-born, unstable, and unpredictable. But staying in the main chamber meant death. Her suit couldn't fight the heat much longer. Her throat burned so intensely that swallowing felt like dragging glass down her esophagus. She pressed her palm against the crystal wall. Even through her glove, the heat felt wrong, radiating, pulsing, like the chamber itself was overheating beyond its natural temperature. "Move," she whispered to herself. She turned sideways and slipped into the fissure. The moment her body entered the narrow passage, everything changed. The light behind her, bright, shimmering, bouncing off massive crystals, disappeared, replaced by a dim, muted glow reflecting through thin mineral slats. The space tightened, compressing her shoulders. Her pack scraped loudly along the wall, kicking up crystalline dust that sparkled faintly in the darkness. She kept one hand on the right wall, feeling her way forward inch by inch. Heat still radiated from the minerals, but the air became marginally cooler, enough for her lungs to unclench, enough for her visor to clear slightly. Her breathing slowed. Then the corridor widened just enough for her to stand fully. She lifted her head. Her visor caught a strange phenomenon. The walls around her glowed with a soft, internal light, faint but hypnotic, like moonlight trapped beneath ice. Thin veins of transparent gypsum ran through the fissure, refracting in intricate patterns that flickered when she moved. She blinked hard. The heat was warping the light, or her brain was. The deeper she walked, the more the illusions grew, shifting shapes, movement in the corners of her vision. Once, she thought she saw someone pass behind her reflection inside a crystal shard, but when she turned, there was nothing. Her voice recorder clicked on from the motion near her chest. Elena Navarro, logging movement into newly formed fissure, she said softly. Her voice sounded hoarse, thinned by dehydration. Temperature decreasing by approximately 4 degrees. Airflow present. She stopped to catch her breath. Suit cooling at 42%. She moved deeper into the fissure and felt the floor angle downward. Not steeply, just enough to notice. A slope meant gravity was leading her somewhere, possibly lower into the cave system. Lower usually meant hotter, but sometimes it meant proximity to natural chimneys or pressure vents where air could move. She took another step. The floor ended. Elena froze instantly, one foot hanging over empty space. Tense, her visor light flicked downward. A drop, a massive one.
Nothing below her but darkness. A deep void between crystal structures, the bottom hidden beneath a haze of shimmering vapor rising like mist. Her breath caught. This wasn't just a gap. It was a vertical shaft, carved naturally by mineral formation and seismic shifts. Jagged crystal blades protruded from the sides, like monstrous teeth waiting to slice anything that fell. She stepped back quickly, heart racing. She crouched, shining her light slowly across the opening. On the far side, barely visible, a thin natural bridge of crystal connected to the continuation of the fissure. Too thin to walk across, too sharp to crawl on, too unstable to trust. Her cooling system beeped another warning, louder this time. Core temperature rising, hydration needed, time running out. She leaned back against the wall, thinking. If she couldn't cross, she had to find another route, but the fissure behind her had no branches, only this forward path. And the cave was shifting again. Faint cracks echoed in the distance. She needed an idea. Her eyes landed on the giant crystal slabs around the shaft. Some angled downward, some bridged partial gaps, some protruded close enough that, with careful movement, she could climb. Not walk, not jump, climb. Elena swallowed hard, feeling the ache of exhaustion through her entire body. "All right," she whispered. She removed her pack, tightening every strap, securing every loose piece of gear. She tested the first protruding slab with her boot, solid but incredibly slick. She crouched lower, gripping the side. Her glove slid slightly. She forced her breath slow. Then she began lowering herself onto the first crystal. One foot, then both hands, then the second foot, sliding downward onto a smaller ledge. The crystal hummed faintly, the vibration from deeper seismic movement, a reminder that the cavern was still shifting, still alive. She moved carefully, making each placement deliberate. Halfway down, she paused. The heat rising from the shaft below hit her like a wave, making her vision blur. She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head. "Stay with it, Elena." She opened her eyes, and the world tilted violently. Not from the cave, from her body. Her vision swam. The crystal in front of her split into 3 overlapping versions. Her head felt weightless, floating away from her shoulders. Symptoms of heat exhaustion were hitting fast. Her suit beeped urgently. Her throat throbbed. Her chest tightened. She gasped, and her foot slipped. She hand-grabbed a jagged crystal just in time, slicing through the outer layer of her glove, cutting into her skin. She held on, teeth clenched, breath shaking. A thin trickle of blood ran down the crystal surface. The heat made it bead and dry almost instantly. Her vision began to stabilize, but the dizziness lingered. She pulled herself upward, away from the shaft's heat, back toward the starting ledge.
Her muscles trembled, threatening to fail at any moment. She reached the top, collapsing against the wall of the fissure, chest heaving. She had tried moving downward and nearly died. Her only option was up. She lifted her visor, staring at the angled slabs above her, sharp, slanted, dangerous, but climbable, barely. She wiped sweat from her eyes. "Up it is," she whispered. And as she reached for the first crystal above her, a low rumble shook the fissure, and the slab she touched began to crack. The crystal slab beneath Elena's hand cracked with a sharp, splintering pop, a sound so sudden and violent that it cut straight through her exhaustion. She jerked her hand back. A thin fracture line crawled across the surface of the crystal, glowing faintly like lightning trapped inside stone. The crack deepened, spreading into a branching network of fractures. "No, no, no," she whispered, stumbling backward. Sound, crash. The crystal groaned, shifted, then collapsed downward with a deafening crash, exploding into the shaft below. Shards ricocheted off the walls, some slicing past her visor so close she felt the air of their passing. The sound echoed through the fissure like thunder trapped inside a glass cathedral. Elena pressed herself against the wall, panting, heart hammering hard enough to shake her ribs. The cave was changing beneath her feet. Every tremor reshaped the pathways. Every collapse narrowed her options. She had to keep moving. She turned her gaze upward. The fissure extended toward a slanted, glowing incline, a ramp of gypsum slabs stacked at odd angles, overlapping like shattered mirrors. Light pulsed faintly from above, refracted through dozens of thin crystal sheets. It wasn't sunlight, but something similar, a filtered luminescence created by the structure of the cavern. It looked surreal, hypnotic, almost welcoming. But she knew better. The heat radiating from above was stronger. Climbing meant facing higher temperatures, but remaining here meant the collapsing shaft would swallow her. Her suit beeped weakly again, its cooling function faltering, core temperature rising, hydration insufficient, risk of heat stroke imminent. She closed her eyes and steadied her breathing. "You climb," she whispered. She began the ascent. Each slab was slanted, slippery, sweating with thin films of condensation. Her boots struggled to grip the polished surfaces. More than once her foot slid backward, sending sharp jolts through her knees. She kept her body low, crawling instead of walking, elbows tucked, weight distributed, careful not to put pressure on cracked edges. Halfway up, she stopped to rest, forehead pressed against a cool patch of crystal. Her breath was ragged. Her throat screamed for water. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The recorder on her belt activated from her movement, capturing every tremble in her voice. "Navarro, ascending unknown chamber. Suit cooling at 38%. If readings are right, upper levels may have increased condensation." Her voice cracked on the last words. She forced herself upward again. The incline narrowed into a steep chute formed by two overlapping crystal slabs. She wedged herself between them, using the friction to climb higher. Splinters of gypsum scraped her suit. Her gloves burned from constant contact with hot mineral surfaces. She dragged herself inch by inch until a burst of blinding light washed over her. She squinted, raising her forearm to shield her visor. Then she lifted herself onto the ledge above and froze. She had emerged into a second chamber, smaller than the main cavern, but more radiant, as if every crystal inside had been polished by volcanic heat. Slabs of selenite arched in sweeping curves overhead, catching and refracting light into hundreds of slow-moving halos. It looked like the inside of a giant gemstone. And in the center of the chamber stood the source of the unusual glow. A crystal column as thick as a tree trunk, cracked open lengthwise by the earthquake. Inside the column, moisture glistened, not droplets, pools, large enough to drink from, large enough to live on. Elena exhaled, her voice shaking with relief. Water. It wasn't fresh, but it was more than condensation. This was a pocket of trapped mineral water preserved for thousands of years. Not ideal, but in this heat, in this place, it was salvation. She crawled toward the fractured column, hands trembling uncontrollably from dehydration. Her vision flickered, black dots floating in and out of existence. She reached the opening and cupped her glove, scooping a small handful of liquid. It steamed slightly from the heat. She lifted it to her lips, letting it drip through the side of her mask. Warm, heavy with minerals, but life. Her entire body shuddered as the moisture hit her throat. Her mind sharpened slightly, her heartbeat slowed, her strength returned, not fully, but enough. She leaned against the column, allowing herself this one moment of stillness. But the cave didn't give her peace for long. A deep rumble rolled through the chamber, louder than any before. The far wall, a massive curved sheet of crystal, shifted visibly, bending under seismic pressure. A hairline fracture raced across it in a diagonal streak of light. Elena's breath caught. If that wall collapsed, it would bury this entire chamber, including her. She stumbled backward, grabbing her pack. I can't stay here, she murmured. She scanned the chamber. Above the glowing column was a narrow ledge leading into an even smaller tunnel, angled upward, too small to stand in, but passable. She swallowed hard, feeling the effects of heat exhaustion cloud her thoughts again. You've got maybe 1 hour left, she whispered to herself. Her suit beeped in agreement. She tightened her pack, took one last desperate sip of the mineral water, and started climbing toward the ledge. Behind her, the enormous crystal wall groaned loudly, then began to crack. The cracking sound behind her wasn't subtle, it was catastrophic. A sharp, violent snap tore through the chamber, followed by a deep groan that vibrated the crystal floor beneath Elena's knees. The massive curved wall of gypsum, the one she had been drinking beside moments earlier, bent inward like a giant lung collapsing. She scrambled up the ledge, breath ragged, muscles trembling from dehydration and heat. The narrow opening above her was barely wide enough for her shoulders, but it led upward, away from the collapsing chamber. She hauled herself over the edge just as the wall behind her gave way. The sound was thunder made of glass. A storm of crystal shards erupted outward, smashing into the floor she had just vacated. A cloud of shimmering dust filled the chamber, glowing like a galaxy exploding in slow motion. Elena shielded her visor with her forearm as the shockwave rippled through the cave. The ledge she clung to shook violently, cracks spiderwebbing across its base. She couldn't hesitate. She crawled forward into the tunnel. The moment she entered it, the world shrank again, the ceiling dropping so low she had to press her body flat, dragging herself inch by inch. Her pack scraped loudly behind her. Heat pressed against her from both sides, radiating through the crystal walls. The tunnel was hotter, far hotter than the chamber she'd just escaped. Her suit beeped frantically. Cooling level 26%. Warning, heat stroke imminent. Seek lower temperature zone. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely pull herself forward. The tunnel floor was slick with a thin glaze of mineral condensation, making her elbows slide with each movement. Her breath hitched. If she panicked here, if she froze, she would die inside this glowing throat of crystal. She forced her breathing slow. "One pull at a time," she whispered weakly. "Just—" Her voice echoed strangely, not in the deep, hollow way of large caves, but in a layered, warped manner, bouncing between the crystal surfaces in whispering loops. A few feet ahead, the tunnel curved. A faint glow pulsed from around the bend. Not bright, but rhythmic. Forward, forward. Elena dragged herself until she reached the curve and froze. The tunnel ahead wasn't empty. Light was moving, shifting, sliding across the crystal walls in slow, serpentine waves. At first, she thought it was refracted glow from the collapsed chamber behind her, but these shapes had form, motion, purpose. They curled around the edges, bending like elongated shadows inside the crystal plates. When she tilted her head, they split into dozens of overlapping outlines, then merged again into a single, slow-moving streak of blue-white brilliance. She whispered, blinking hard, "Just heat illusions." But when she blinked again, the shape shifted direction, against the angle of her visor light, and disappeared into the wall as though diving beneath water. Elena shuddered, not from cold, but from the primal fear of seeing motion in a place where nothing alive should move. She crawled deeper. The tunnel narrowed further, compressing her ribs. Her breathing grew shallow, partly from heat, partly from weight pressing on her chest. The air felt syrup-thick, growing hotter with each meter she advanced. Her suit's temperature alarm screamed. Danger, core temp rising, hydration required immediately, cooling failure imminent. Her head throbbed, her ears buzzed, her vision pulsed in and out of focus. She wiped her visor with shaking hands, but the blur wasn't on the glass, it was inside her mind. Shapes began flickering in the corners of her eyes. Humanoid silhouettes formed in the crystal seams, moving as though submerged in glowing liquid. Sometimes they leaned, sometimes they turned. Sometimes they raised arms that weren't arms at all, long, tapered extensions blending into the crystal around them. She squeezed her eyes shut. "You're hallucinating," she whispered. "Stay focused." She crawled another meter. And then her hand plunged into something wet. Her palm sank into a shallow stream of condensation flowing along the base of the tunnel. Warm, almost hot, but water nonetheless. The sight of it hit her like electricity. She cupped both hands and guided water through the side of her mask, letting droplets trickle over her tongue. It burned slightly, mineral-heavy and sharp, but the relief was instant. Her pulse slowed, her vision steadied, her dizziness eased. She splashed her faceplate with a handful, cooling it slightly. Then she froze. Her visor fog cleared just enough to reveal something ahead. The tunnel opened into a small, spherical chamber, and on the far side of that chamber was an arch-shaped break in the crystal wall, an exit, natural, angled upward, leading to higher ground. Her heart fluttered weakly with hope. Elena pulled herself into the chamber and stopped dead. Danger. The entire floor was covered in a thin layer of shimmering mist, not fog, but superheated vapor rising from cracks between the crystals. It looked harmless, dreamlike, beautiful, but she knew what it meant. There was a drop beneath the vapor, another shaft, another deadly fall, hidden beneath deceptive mist. She took one cautious step. The vapor shifted. A faint hiss echoed from below. She knelt, extending one hand over the mist. A wave of scorching air surged upward, enough to blister unprotected skin in seconds. She jerked her hand back. "No walking here," she whispered. "No stepping. This floor." She scanned the chamber. Above her, a web of intersecting crystal spines formed a jagged, uneven ceiling, but strong enough to support her weight if she climbed. She would have to cross the chamber upside down, suspended, crawling above a superheated pit of death. Her strength was fading, her suit was overheating, her body was begging for rest, but rest here meant death. She lifted herself toward the lowest crystal spine, gripping tightly with shaking fingers. As she hoisted herself up, her foot slipped on the smooth mineral surface, and something moved in the mist below. Not light, not heat, something darker, a shape, slow, silent, waiting. Elena didn't dare look down again. She pulled herself onto the crystal web overhead. As the cave trembled once more, and a low, almost human hum vibrated through the walls. Elena tightened her grip on the crystal spine above her, fingers trembling violently as she pulled herself fully onto the jagged lattice overhead. The entire ceiling felt alive, vibrating with each distant rumble of the cave shifting under seismic stress. Her palms slid across the polished gypsum, barely finding purchase on ridges sharper than broken glass. She didn't look down. She didn't dare. The vapor rising from below curled upward in ghost-like waves, glowing faintly from refracted crystal light. Beneath that shimmering fog lay a superheated drop, a death pit made of boiling mineral gas and darkness. A single slip meant vaporizing heat. A single mistake meant vanishing without a sound. She breathed shallowly, pressing her chest to the crystal web, distributing her weight like a climber crossing thin ice. 3 meters, she whispered to herself. Her voice shook. That's all. Her suit chimed weakly. Cooling level 19%. Core temp critical. Hydration recommended immediately. She swallowed dryly, a painful scrape through her swollen throat. Her body felt as though it were cooking from the inside, her breath hitting the mask in hot, rapid bursts. Every instant begged her to stop and rest, but rest meant death. She slid her right hand forward, gripping another ridge. The crystal hummed beneath her palm, a long, low vibration that resonated through the bone. She froze. That vibration wasn't seismic. It was rhythmic, slow, deep, too steady to be random. She looked around, eyes flicking from one glittering wall to another. The glowing shapes she had seen earlier shimmered faintly in the distance, distorted by layers of crystal. One stretched, elongated like a figure turning in liquid light. Another leaned, another folded into itself. "It's the heat," she whispered through dry lips. "It's hallucinations."
But the vibration returned, a deeper hum, almost a tone, resonating through the entire ceiling structure. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't a creature, but it felt intentional, as if the cave itself were groaning, singing, warning. Her grip slipped. A jolt shot through her stomach as her legs swung downward into empty space. Heat blasted up from the pit below, flooding her senses with the smell of mineral steam. She clamped her jaw and pulled herself flat again, fingers digging into a jagged seam hard enough to slice into her glove. She blinked sweat out of her eyes, or was it melting suit microfabric? The world blurred for a second. The crystal lattice above her warped, bending like liquid glass. No, not yet. Her brain was overheating. "Keep moving," she whispered, voice cracking. "Don't." Her arms shook violently, struggling under her own weight. She dragged her body forward another half-meter. The arch-shaped exit loomed ahead, a dark triangle of safety framed by glowing crystal walls. 2 meters. She reached for the next ridge. Her vision flickered. The crystal under her hand seemed to ripple, like she was gripping a surface underwater. Shapes inside the wall moved, not her reflection this time, but darker, longer, sliding, as though following her. She blinked. They dissolved. They reappeared further along the wall. Her breath caught in her throat. Heat hallucinations, severe ones, meant her brain was nearing failure. Her suit beeped louder. "Warning, core temp approaching fatal threshold. Seek cooling zone immediately." She dragged herself forward again, but her body betrayed her. Her arms buckled, and she slipped dangerously low, heat surging toward her like a furnace inhaling. She forced her right elbow upward, scraping it brutally along a jagged spine. The pain snapped her focus like a whip. Another half-meter. She exhaled a shaking breath. 1 meter. She could almost reach the arch now, the edges dark and solid, promising cooler air beyond. She extended her hand. A loud crack split the chamber. The crystal spine she clung to fractured, a hairline break racing along its length. Elena gasped, clinging tighter. The spine sank half an inch under her weight. She felt it sag, felt it weaken, felt it beginning to give way. She lunged forward, grabbing a higher ridge just as the entire spine snapped behind her, falling into the steaming pit below. Her feet swung wildly into empty air, heat blasting upward so intensely she felt her visor fog instantly. She heaved herself upward with the last of her strength, scraping her stomach against sharp mineral edges, pulling herself up onto a higher beam. Her vision blurred, her ears rang, her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. But she didn't stop. She lunged blindly toward the arch. Her hand found stone. Her arm pulled. Her knee lifted onto the ledge. She tumbled into the opening, landing hard on her side.
For a moment, she lay completely still, chest heaving, visor fogging, suit alarms blaring inside her ears. She was out. She was alive. Barely. Her suit cooling flashed a final warning. Cooling failure in 6 minutes. She rolled onto her back. The tunnel beyond the arch sloped upward, narrow, dark, promising at least a few degrees of relief. She crawled forward, dragging herself up the incline, pain searing through her arms and ribs. Behind her, the mist chamber rumbled, a low, resonant growl of shifting crystals. But ahead, the air grew cooler, just by a few degrees, but enough to matter, enough to live a few minutes longer. Elena pushed herself up the tunnel until the ground beneath her hand changed texture completely. Not crystal, not mineral. Something rough, something dry, something impossible. Stone. Natural stone. She blinked, confused. The Naica Caves were pure crystal. Stone didn't belong here, not in this part of the system, not at this depth. Her visor scanned the surface automatically. Composition, limestone. Temperature, 36 degrees Celsius. Moisture, low. She frowned. Limestone? Inside a sealed crystal system? She crawled forward, and her light revealed something that made her freeze. Carved into the limestone was a shape, a mark, a symbol, a man-made inscription. Old, very old, and not part of any documented cave structure. What? The cave behind her had been trying to kill her, but the tunnel ahead, it had been shaped. By hands. By people who shouldn't have been here. Elena stared at the carved symbol in the limestone, unable to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she knew about the Naica system. A limestone chamber inside a crystal cave? Impossible. The Naica crystals formed in superheated hydrothermal pockets, sealed off for hundreds of thousands of years. No human tunnels intersected here. No documented shaft passed this deep. And certainly no mining team had ever carved anything this far into the crystal fields. Yet the mark on the wall was unmistakably human. A circle, a line through it, and 4 smaller marks radiating outward, like sun rays. Its edges were weathered, softened by humidity and time, but it was still clear, still deliberate. She raised her gloved hand, tracing the air near the carving without touching it. What? She whispered. Her visor dimmed slightly, adjusting to the chamber's muted glow. The limestone tunnel extended ahead, sloping upward in an uneven incline. The walls were rough, jagged, shaped by hand tools, chisels, picks, not natural erosion. Someone had dug this. Someone had come here long before crystal researchers ever mapped the main chamber. Her recorder switched on again, capturing her trembling words. Discovery. Limestone tunnel intersecting crystalline chamber. Evidence of historical mining activity. Symbol carved into wall. Unknown origin. Her voice trailed off as another realization hit her. If this was a mining tunnel, then it must lead somewhere. Ventilation shafts, old transport routes, exit points, a chance, maybe the only chance, to escape. She pushed herself to her knees, exhausted but alive. Her cooling system flashed its final warning. Cooling failure imminent. Severe dehydration. Seek breathable airflow immediately. She dragged herself deeper into the tunnel. The air changed almost instantly. It was still hot, unbearably so, but less humid, less suffocating. Her lungs expanded more easily. Her visor stopped fogging so aggressively. The burning sensation in her throat receded slightly. Each step forward felt like walking out of a fever dream. But the tunnel was unstable. Loose stones crumbled beneath her boots. Dust fell from cracks overhead. Her headlamp flickered, struggling to illuminate the space. As she continued, she noticed more carvings, marks on the walls. Not words, not drawings, warnings. Triangles with downward slashes, spirals, symbols resembling fractured crystals, or perhaps maps showing danger zones. Some looked ancient, others surprisingly recent. A chill slipped down her spine despite the heat. This place wasn't forgotten. Someone, at some point, had been coming back. She reached a fork, two branching tunnels. The left led downward. She felt a hot draft pulsing from below. The right sloped upward, jagged and narrow, but cooler. She didn't hesitate. Upward meant life. She turned right. But as she stepped forward, something caught her eye. Half buried in the dust at the base of the left tunnel was a metal object, rusted, crushed, unmistakable. A mining helmet. Old, decades old, with a faded company insignia on the side. Her breath caught. The Naica mine had been active since the 1900s, but operations had never extended into the crystal caverns this far underground. The heat alone would kill unprotected workers in minutes. So what was a helmet doing here? She crouched slowly, lifting it with trembling hands. Inside the helmet was something even more disturbing. Scratches, deep ones, dozens of them, made by fingernails. Someone had been trapped here before. Someone who tried to claw messages into the metal before their strength failed. Her stomach twisted. She lowered the helmet gently. "Ugh," she murmured weakly, forcing her legs to move again. She turned toward the right-hand tunnel, the cooler path, and followed it upward. Her visor caught faint, fresh markings on the wall. Arrows. Human arrows. Recent. Her heart pounded harder. Not just miners, not just ancient tunnels. Someone else had come through here not long ago. Someone who knew about this passage. Someone who might have tried to escape, like her. She followed the arrows, crawling over broken rock and squeezing through narrow choke points. Sweat dripped endlessly inside her suit. Her limbs felt like lead, her mind flickering in and out of clarity. Halfway up the incline, she stumbled and collapsed against the wall. Her vision darkened at the edges. No, not here, not now. She reached for her pack, fumbling for the last hydration pouch she'd improvised, a tiny fragment of crystal she had filled with condensation earlier. She tilted it, letting a few drops fall onto her tongue. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Her suit beeped, the cooling system finally shutting down. Her internal temperature spiked instantly. She gasped. Her head swam. Her pulse hammered like a drum inside her skull. She forced herself back to her feet. Every instinct screamed at her to lie down, close her eyes, sleep. But sleep would mean death, a quiet slipping into darkness that she wouldn't wake from. She pushed forward, upward, 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 and then, without warning, the tunnel opened. She stepped into a cavity shaped like a bell chamber, ceiling low but air noticeably cooler. Limestone walls sparkled with mineral deposits, and old wooden support beams lined the perimeter, warped but intact. This was man-made, fully man-made, a forgotten mining room. And on the far wall, a ladder, rusty, bent, embedded into stone, leading upward into darkness. Her breath hitched. A ladder meant access. Access meant an old shaft. An old shaft meant a possible escape route. She staggered toward it. Her hand reached for the first rung. Something clattered behind her. She spun. A stone rolled across the floor. Not from her, not from vibration, from deeper inside the tunnel she had just exited. Footsteps, slow, dragging, too heavy to be an animal, too uneven to be human. Elena's blood ran cold. She stared into the darkness, visor flickering. Something moved in the tunnel. Tall, thin, distorted by the crystal light behind it. Not a hallucination. Not this time. She backed toward the ladder, heart pounding violently. The shape in the shadows tilted, shifted, and stepped forward. Elena grabbed the rung, pulled herself upward, didn't look back, not even once. As she climbed into the darkness above, the sound followed her. A low, scraping whisper, moving closer. The ladder groaned under Elena's weight, old metal, flaking rust, bolts that trembled with every movement, as if one wrong pull would send the entire structure peeling off the limestone wall and crashing into the chamber below. But she didn't slow down, not when the scraping sound from the tunnel grew louder, not when the low, distorted whisper echoed up into the chamber like breath forced through broken crystal. Her hands gripped the rungs, slipping from sweat and condensation. Her muscles screamed with every pull. Her vision blurred as heat exhaustion clawed at her consciousness. Up, up, up. She climbed blindly, driven by survival instinct more than strength. Behind her, the steps grew louder. Footsteps. Scraping? No rhythm, no pattern, no certainty that it was something alive at all.
Her brain, overheated and dehydrated, couldn't trust what it perceived. But she trusted the fear. Fear meant move. Fear meant live. She reached the 7th rung when the ladder suddenly shifted, a metallic shudder that vibrated up through her arms. She froze, pressed tight against the wall, barely breathing. The sound from below paused. Silence. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it over the ringing in her ears. She forced her hands tighter around the rung, feeling flakes of rust break off against her gloves. Don't break. Please don't break. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 5. 8. Then the scraping resumed, louder this time. It was climbing. Not the ladder, the walls. Something was dragging itself upward using the irregular stone, pulling its weight hand over hand, or something like hands. Elena's breath stuttered, her arms trembled, her body begged to collapse. But she climbed faster, rung after rung, ignoring the sharp metallic squeals beneath her. The shaft narrowed as she ascended, the walls closing in, making every movement feel claustrophobic and suffocating. Her visor dimmed to compensate for the darkness. Dust rained from above as the ancient ladder protested her presence. At the 12th rung, a faint draft brushed against her faceplate. Airflow. Cooler air. Her pulse jumped. She looked up, her visor light catching a slanted wooden beam lodged diagonally across the shaft. Above it, the tunnel angled sharply to the right. A ventilation corridor. A real one. A way out. She reached for the next rung. Clang! A sound like metal punched from below. She flinched so hard she almost lost her grip. She looked down. A shadow moved just beyond the edge of her light. Tall, narrow, stretched in the flickering glow, like a figure displaced by warped geometry. It clung to the wall, climbing with slow, deliberate movements. Her throat closed. It wasn't hallucination. Not fully. Not anymore. Her body kicked into pure survival mode. She scrambled upward, ignoring the ladder's violent rattling. One rung bent under her weight, a metallic snap echoing through the shaft, but she didn't stop long enough to feel fear. Her gloves slipped, her boots skidded. She slammed her elbow against the wall to stabilize herself, pain vibrating through bone. Come on! Come on! She reached the wooden beam and pulled herself onto it,
crouching low. The beam bowed dangerously under her weight, old, splintered, brittle. It wouldn't hold long. She crawled across it, gripping the rough edges, ignoring the splinters stabbing through her gloves. At the far end of the beam was a narrow crawl space, barely a meter tall, but filled with a faint current of cooler air flowing from somewhere above. She squeezed herself inside, just as a hand-like silhouette appeared at the base of the ladder. Long, angular, not shaped like bones should be shaped. Her breath caught. The shadow paused, turning, though it had no head, but Elena felt, unmistakably, that it was looking at her. She pulled herself deeper into the crawl space, twisting her body sideways to slip between two limestone bulges. The beam snapped behind her. Wood shattered. Metal screamed. A thunderous crash echoed through the shaft as the ladder collapsed, falling into the chamber below in a storm of dust and rust. The sound drowned out everything, even the scraping. Elena clenched her eyes shut, pressing herself flat against the crawlspace floor as vibrations rippled through the stone. Silence. The creature, the shadow, whatever had been following her, was no longer climbing. Or the collapse had cut off its path. It didn't matter. She was alive. For now. She crawled deeper, dragging herself through the tight, angled tunnel. Her knees scraped stone. Her ribs pressed against the ceiling. Her pack caught on protruding rock, forcing her to twist painfully. But the air grew cooler still, only slightly, but enough for her mind to clear a little. She reached a wider space and collapsed onto her side, gasping. Her visor slowly unfogged. And then, for the first time since the earthquake, she heard something completely different. A sound that brought tears instantly to her eyes. A faint, distant hum of machinery. Fans, generators, a ventilation system. Her throat tightened, voice cracking. "Oh God, I'm close." She pushed herself forward, crawling toward the sound with renewed desperation. The tunnel bent sharply upward one final time, and as she dragged herself over the crest, a thin beam of white light hit her visor. Not glowing crystal light, not refracted mineral light. Real light. Daylight. Sunlight. A narrow maintenance grate lay ahead, rusted, dented, half buried in debris, but undeniably an exit to the surface vents. Elena sobbed with relief. But as she crawled toward it, her glove brushed something else in the dirt. Fabric. Cloth. She froze. She lifted it gently. A torn sleeve from a miner's uniform, decades old, stained, embedded with crystalline dust. And beside it, bones. A partial skeleton, curled toward the grate, fingers still reaching for freedom. Her breath hitched. This wasn't the first person to make it this far. This was the first person who ever got close. She closed her eyes. "I'm finishing what you started," she whispered. Then she crawled toward the grate, as sunlight glimmered across her visor for the first time in 30 hours. Elena crawled toward the grate with trembling hands, each movement slower than the last. Her body ached, her muscles threatening to give out completely. Her throat felt scorched, her vision pulsed in waves. But sunlight, real sunlight, glimmered through the cracks in the metal ahead. She reached for the grate. Her fingers wrapped around rusted iron, flakes breaking off like dried leaves. She pulled. Nothing. The grate didn't budge, not even a millimeter. Her chest tightened, her breath hitched. Panic clawed up her spine. "No! No, please! Not here!" She dug her fingers beneath the edge and pulled again, harder this time. The metal shrieked, sending vibrations through her gloves. Her shoulders burned, her elbows screamed. She gritted her teeth and heaved with everything she had left. The grate lifted half an inch, then slammed back down. She almost collapsed. Her suit beeped weakly, cooling system fully dead, heat building uncontrollably inside. Her vision flickered black, her pulse raced, her breath came in shallow, dizzy gasps. She couldn't afford another wave of heat exhaustion. She needed leverage, something to pry the grate loose. She looked around the debris-strewn maintenance cavity, and there it was, a fallen metal pipe, corroded but solid, half buried in dust. Elena crawled toward it, dragging herself with her elbows. Each inch felt like a marathon. Her fingers grazed the pipe, slipped, then clamped down. She turned back toward the grate, the world swaying like she was underwater. She wedged the pipe beneath the frame, braced her shoulder against the limestone wall, and pushed. The pipe bent, the rust cracked, her ribs screamed from pressure, but the grate rose, slowly, a centimeter at a time, whispered through clenched teeth. The metal snapped upward another few centimeters, then another, then, clang. The frame split. The grate shot upward, flipping open with a harsh metallic slam. Elena collapsed forward, half falling, half climbing through the opening. Her hands hit rough concrete. Not crystal, not limestone, concrete. She blinked against the sudden brightness. Her visor adjusted, revealing a narrow vertical shaft lined with metal brackets. Above her, a circular hatch, sun glowing around its edges. Her heart surged with one final wave of desperate hope. She grabbed the first bracket and pulled herself up. Her arms shook violently, threatening to let go. Her knees collapsed twice, but she forced herself upward, bracket after bracket, foot after foot, until she reached the hatch. She pressed her palms against it. It didn't move, locked. Her throat tightened, but she didn't panic this time. She reached into the corner of the frame and felt around the rim of old machines and dust. Her glove brushed something metallic. A handle. She pulled. Nothing. She pulled harder. A pop, a hiss, a release of pressure. The hatch shifted upward half an inch, letting in a blast of cool, fresh air. Not cave air, not processed mine air. Surface air. She pushed the hatch fully open. Sunlight exploded across her visor, blinding and beautiful. For a moment, she couldn't see anything but white brilliance, a pure, brilliant burn across her exhausted eyes. Then her vision adjusted. Blue sky, real sky.
Open desert stretching beyond the mine's ventilation station. A rescue team stood only a few meters away, equipment cases, scanners, radios scrambling as the hatch burst open from below. One rescuer dropped his clipboard. Another shouted, "We've got movement!" Elena tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped her throat. Hands reached toward her. Strong hands, human hands. They pulled her up and out of the shaft, laying her onto the warm concrete. Someone removed her helmet, lifting it gently off her drenched hair. Cool air hit her face, and she gasped, a raw, broken sound of relief. A medic leaned over her, shouting orders. "Core temp dangerously high! Get IV fluids now! Oxygen mask!" She felt something touch her lips, cold liquid dripping into her mouth. She coughed, choked, swallowed. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the sunlight above. One rescuer knelt beside her. "How?" he asked, softly, stunned. Elena blinked, eyes heavy, voice barely a whisper. A breath. Her lips trembled. Tears, hers or the medic's, she couldn't tell, blurred her vision. She felt hands lifting her onto a stretcher, felt the sun warming her cheeks, heard the frantic voices softening into the distance. As consciousness faded, she whispered the last thing her recorder would later pick up. "The cave tried to bury me." And the screen fades out.